Okay, so while I eat my apple, we can read this thread. Alright, let's see. I'm Dobie, the Guildmaster of Nescent. I've heard that name before, I think. So they raid 9 hours a week and they're top 100. We may be what many would consider elite. However, I do believe that if improvements can be made, some of these issues that raiding as a whole in WoW would ultimately improve. Well, the typical 4 zones, 8 dungeons, and 1 raid. I don't think this is a bad thing, but I also don't believe it's a good thing. Why is that? Okay. It's too predictable. I also believe it inhibits innovation and creativity. Creativity in what respect? Perhaps that the lore need not always fit a single size of content, and in doing so led to content that will, in aggregate, maybe a certain size, as measured by how much there is to do, but may be represented in any number of smaller sizes shapes, such as 3 zones, 6 dungeons, and 3 raids. Not all zones are the same size, nor is every dungeon or every raid. Remember when we used to get 1 or 2 boss raids? Where did those go? Why don't they exist anymore? Why have we not seen something like SCC or TK released at the same time? Yes, we're aiming for a 5 to 6 month content model, so we have to right size, but why not 2 5 boss raids released simultaneously? Why not a Pterodon, a Naguura Slayer, and a 5 boss raid? The lore is so narrowly focused on a singular issue that we've lost that creative exploration of varied content structure. We had Crucible of Storms back in BFA, but the timing was really killed that raid. It was too close to the end of the tier. But it had been released at the same time as Battle for the Star lore. If we look back at the success of Vanilla, we see a lot more content structure variety. And while yes, those iterations of WoW weren't seasonally focused, why aren't there hard world bosses anymore? Wait, we never had hard world bosses though, right? Hard world bosses were only a thing in Vanilla. And that was not really hard. It just required that many people to kill. Yeah, but they were not hard. It just required a lot of people. And that is by default not gonna work in retail. Cause like if you need 200 people, then the servers are like, you're just gonna lag out and it's gonna be a mess, right? I think it's fine that they're not hard anymore. I personally never liked, I don't know. Do you really think we need hard world bosses where you need lots and lots of people? We're just lagging out and it's just a lag fest. I don't know. I do think it's true that getting different sized rates though is a good idea. I do think like WoW in general has been a little bit too predictable. I agree. Like, why are the rates even 8 to 9 bosses? Like, I feel like these 8 to 9 boss rates are also just kind of like there's so many bosses that almost feel like, why do they even exist? I know. I'm not a big fan of the 9 to 11 boss rate sizes. I disagree with this point, I think. I disagree with this point here that he's making. Like, I think farm being important. Like, do we need farm to be more important than it is? Because farming gear is worth it. It's not that it's not worth it. It's just, like, I personally think if items that you farm this tier are actually best in slot next tier, or like really good next tier that you have them equipped for a long time, that has so many disadvantages. People that come back that haven't played the patch, they're gonna have a big disadvantage. If you're re-rolling from one class to the other next patch, you have a disadvantage because you need to go back and farm old items. Like, it also, I don't know, like, I think making farm more important is not good. I personally just don't like farm at all, and I never liked farm. I never liked farming raids after clearing them once, even if the items were better in the past. I just never liked it. So the less importance a farm raid had, the better it is for me personally. It's just personal opinion, I guess. But yeah, I think making farm more important doesn't make it more fun. At least making farm more important for next tier does not make it more fun this tier. This means we are often taking a 1 to 2 month break from the game. I also think that's not bad. In fact, I think that it would be a lot healthier for the game overall if taking breaks would feel less bad sometimes. I just don't understand why we as players are constantly asking Blizzard to incentivize us to play the game all of the time. Like, I honestly don't understand why people are doing this. Because I see this many times. This post is one of the things. Like, we're literally telling Blizzard, hey, give us endless farm, or give us artifact power back, or give us a reason to play the game all of the time. Which, I just don't understand why people are asking for that. I don't want to be feeling that way. I don't want to have this constant feeling that I'm missing out if I'm not playing the game. I think it's totally fine to have breaks where playing the game is less important. But I also think that there's a difference between wanting to play the game all of the time or playing the game once a week, right? So incentivizing people to do the farm rate is not the same as incentivizing people to play the game all of the time, like playing in plus and doing other things outside of raiding. But I do also think that people still farm raid, no? Like, don't people still farm raid? I mean, our guild does. Sometimes it's true that farm raiding is almost like pointless, and guilds only do it to not lose all interest in the game. Like, I think there's certainly times where farm raiding is pointless, and people still do it because they don't want to, like, they want to just meet once in a while and to actually raid. It's nice to have stuff to do in game. Currently, there's not much to do if you are raiding, doing a plus. Yeah, see, but that's the issue, the way you're thinking. Because it is not true that there is no stuff to do. That is just false. Right, Kendo? Like, it's inherently a false statement to make that there's not enough stuff to do, because there is stuff to do. We're just not being forced to do stuff right now. And that's why less people are playing. Which, is that a bad thing? Is it bad that people that don't want to play in plus and don't want to farm mounts and don't want to farm transmogs, is it bad that those people are currently not playing? I don't think it is bad. Because if they would rather do something else, then they should do something else. People should not be forced to play the game if they don't want to. Right? Like, I think that's totally fine. If you don't want to play in plus, then you should do something else. And if you want to play in plus, then go and play in plus, right? I think a lot of people that complain about this are just sad that the other people are not playing the game. Right? Because let's say you're a player that likes playing in plus. Then you log on at the start of a patch, and there's so many people online, and there's so many things to do, and it's so fun. And then 2 months into the patch, you log in, and barely anyone is online. And that kind of sucks for you, because you like playing the game, but the other people don't like playing the game when they don't have to. So I feel like those kind of people that always like playing, they have this like feeling that, oh, we should incentivize players to play more so there's more people online. But what you're actively asking for is to force people to play the game instead of letting them play voluntarily, right? So I don't necessarily agree with like forcing people to, well, and when I say forcing, I always mean incentivizing, because obviously you're never forcing somebody to play a game. Alright, the tuning problem, let's see. This was not the case a number of years ago. Back in Nighthawk, after 2 months of farm, Gul'dan was falling over. Well, that's not true. Nighthawk was cleared really fast, no? Well, really fast, but it was cleared the same amount of time as rates are being cleared now, approximately, no? I'm pretty sure. Oh, he's saying that after 2 months of farm, Gul'dan was falling over. Ah, he's talking about... okay, I see. I also don't necessarily understand why he wants that to happen, though. I'm confused. Why do we want the bosses to become much easier over time? Like, why would that make the game much better? So, you're saying to nerf the content over time for progressing guilds, but he's specifically mentioning farm. He's not mentioning progress guilds. Because a guild that has the content in farm, they will gain a lot more items than a guild that is progressing a boss, right? Sometimes even extend the lockout. If they only raid a few days. And making gear... So like... If you extend the lockout, or if you have to extend the lockout to kill a boss, then the more important gear is for you, the worse it is for that guild, right? So having 90% of your full power already to start technically is better for some guilds that have to extend the lockout otherwise. Because if farm gear is very, very important, then this thing happens where guilds that don't raid that much have an issue. Because they need to re-clear to get their super big power increase. But they don't have time to actually progress the bosses then, you know? Like, it does create an issue for those guilds if that is not the case. I do agree. I talked about the tier set bonus swing. Well, to be fair, this number is wrong. 10 to 15% is 100% wrong because we're not gaining a tier set from 0. We're losing a tier set and gaining a new tier set. And almost all of the time, that does not equate to a 10 to 15% damage increase, except at the very start of the expansion when you're going from 0 tier sets to the first tier set. But I do agree that it disrupts a linear difficulty curve. I talked about this before, how the tier set jump is too much. Yeah, I mean, this is also something I mentioned before. I do think that tuning Mythic around the race level first and around the normal Mythic guild is just very difficult and almost impossible. And that's why I also was suggesting adding something like an ultimate difficulty. Or like dividing, yeah. Because what he's saying at the end is true. Blizzard is trying to fit 2 tiers of difficulty into Mythic and it's not working. I think that is true. They are trying to do that. Yeah. I do think one of the best solutions... Well, it's hard to tell. So, there's one big problem. I think that the race level first is incredibly important for World of Warcraft. A lot of people don't think that's true, but I think it is. The race level first is a huge marketing tool for WoW, if not the #1 marketing tool. Every time the race level first comes around, people get really excited, people watch it on Twitch, like it's a big thing. People get excited to play the game again, and so on. Like, I think it's a much bigger marketing tool than what people think, most people. And the problem is, if you're dividing those 2 tiers of difficulty that are currently in Mythic, it also reduces the importance of the race level first, which also reduces the marketing value of the race level first, right? And that's a problem. Normal players don't care. No one in my guild cared either. You're not the person that this is for, though, because you're already playing the game. Light Dark Gaming. Like, clearly you're a normal player that is playing the game. Marketing is not for you. You don't need to be marketed to, because you're already playing. So it doesn't matter if you care about the race level first. It matters that people that are not playing the game or have stopped playing or played in the past get encouraged to start playing again through the race well first, right? To say that the race well first doesn't have a big marketing value is delusional. Like, it's so obvious that the race well first is a big marketing tool. Look how many people are watching it. Like, the pure fact that it has hundreds of thousands of viewers over the course of 2 weeks is a clear indicator of how big of a marketing value it has, right? It's that obvious. There's no argument to be made here. It's literally, like, you can just look at the numbers. It's true. Just because some people don't care about it, whatever, yeah, that's fine. If your guild doesn't care about it or your friends don't care about it, so what? That doesn't mean that it's not true. People watching aren't going to play though. You're wrong. You're wrong. It's like saying, oh, Coca-Cola advertisement doesn't matter because I'm not going to buy a Coca-Cola because I watched the advertisement. Like, you're currently saying that advertisement is not worth it, which obviously it is. That's how we function currently. But yeah, so again, the race well first, big marketing tool. If they divide the difficulty of Mythic into like an ultimate kind of difficulty, so they can tune it separately, that would be much better for the game itself. It would be much better for Mythic rating, right? Because if you make an ultimate difficulty that only has cosmetics, then that would be great for the race well first because they could just tune everything for the races there. And a normal player, a normal Mythic raider could play the Mythic raid that then could be tuned around them, right? But as I said, the issue is that the race well first would lose marketing value because less people would care about it because the players that are playing like the race well first would be around this ultimate difficulty, which is not something that they ever want to play. And usually esports in general are a lot more interesting to people if they think that they could someday do the same thing, right? If it's more relatable. But if ultimate is a difficulty that only drops cosmetics and that is not like something that gives you loot, then a lot of people would not strive to do that content ever. Some people would just be like, okay, I never want to do ultimates ever. And then it would also just reduce the value of the race, I think. Guys, I'm not going to argue with you about the value of advertisement. Just Google it or watch a documentary about it or whatever, because there's no point. Just, it has a lot of value, period. If you disagree, fine, but let's not talk about that part. But anyway, let's move on. That I personally think that is certainly something that Blizzard is thinking about whenever they think about even remotely like dividing the difficulties or making like one separate thing. I do think that is something that they very much consider. I think so, at least. I do also think that nerfing content over time passively is something they could start doing again. I do always hate when they nerf bosses actively, but the problem is again the race to will first. Because in the past they would nerf their raids passively with like passive buffs, like the ICC buff, or there was also a buff in Uldir. No, was it Uldir? Where you got like a passive buff depending on how many weeks you did the raid. Yeah, Uldir. There's also the legendary ring, any kind of legendary effect that we had. Renown and Azerite traits is what we had before. We also had like the legendary cloak with the corruption. We had artifact power. Like we almost always had something that passively nerfed the raid. The problem with these passive nerfs though is that the race to all first guilds got so good that they have to be held back by something that is not a damage check or a healing check, in my opinion. Because it's not interesting to watch the race will first if the guilds are stuck at the damage check that is impossible for them to beat, right? Like if the damage check is so difficult that they cannot do it, then it's not interesting to watch. Then it's just unfair, then it's just boring. So the damage check needs to be doable by the raceable first guilds. And then what else are you gonna do to hold them back? Well, mechanics, right? The raceable first guilds have to be held back with mechanics nowadays. In the past, it was different. In the past, the raceable first guilds were not as good as they are now. So holding guilds back through damage checks was totally something you could do. But nowadays, the guilds are so good that they're gonna do the maximum damage output very quickly in comparison to the past, and therefore they have to be held back with mechanics. And how do you hold the best guilds back with mechanics without nerfing it afterwards actively, right? Because mechanics cannot be nerfed through more gear, at least not enough. The only thing that can be nerfed through gear and through passive buffs that increase from one week to the next is damage checks, healing checks, right? But as soon as you have mechanics that are created to hold back raceable first guilds, then any kind of passive buff you're gaining through gear, buffs, into, like, you know, stat buffs, haste buff, power increase, like that was not gonna help. Like look at Tindril. No matter how much gear you have, it doesn't matter. If you don't do, if you don't soak the seeds, you wipe. So it's like you have to do the mechanic properly, otherwise the gear does not matter. And therefore, that's where the disconnect happens right now, right? That's where this passive power increase is irrelevant. And that's why they're probably also not really doing it anymore. Because they decided, you know what, this passive power increase is not really gonna solve our active nerfing issue. Because even with a passive power increase, they would still have to actively nerf the bosses. No power increase in the world would have helped us kill Tindril in its pre-nerf version or Firak, right? Therefore, what's the point in giving people a passive power increase if you have to nerf the boss actively anyway? And that's like a little bit of an issue right now. That's, again, the issue with fitting 2 tiers of difficulty into Mythic. At this point, you almost have to divide it for it to somewhat be tunable properly without having active nerfs like this. I think so, at least. He's suggesting these kind of hard modes where you like enable a hard mode, which I think, again, it would technically solve the issue better than dividing the rate tiers completely. Because I talked about market value of, or marketing value of the raceable first, and by dividing Mythic into 2 different difficulties, by adding like an ultimate difficulty, that would be a big division. Like that would mean it's a completely different rate or completely different difficulty. But if you're adding hard mode to a boss, that still kind of makes the same rate, and it would not lessen the marketing value from the raceable first as much as if it was a completely different difficulty. So I do like the hard mode idea, generally speaking. Because I do think the raceable first would still be watched by a lot of people, even if they are playing like a hard mode version of a boss while everyone else is playing the normal version. I think so, at least. I'm not sure. But that is something they could technically try, I think, without it having like huge impact. One thing I think would also help Mythic rating a lot is reducing the raid size even further. But that hurts like the raceable first, which sucks. And it also changes everything. It's a little bit of a big change, but raid size I do think is a big problem as well. Alright, let's see what the next point is. Raid composition has been extremely restrictive. I think this is commonly understood now, but it's worth reiterating in the context of the other issue being outlined. The typical retort is, well, just bring the player, optimization only matters for the world first guilds. This implies it is a self-inflicted problem, which it certainly can be. However, the reality is that rates are presently tuned around such optimization. Further, because farming is so diminished in effectiveness, and the fact that we rely on nerfs, has led to guilds inevitably prescribing to what is most optimal because that is generally the easiest way to progress. Keep in mind, this is in the context of progressing at a certain pace, generally Hall of Fame, but definitely top 100. If we were not reliant on nerfs and tuning was not as strict, then more flexibility would be possible. Thus, if you're a guild above the top 200, 300, you're unlikely to feel these issues as much, but that does not mean they are very real for hundreds of guilds. The nature of raid buffs, debuffs, niche, utility, and now multiplicative player empowerment has forced guilds rosters to shrink over the last few years. This is because we generally have fewer compositions change than we have ever had. We're rotating only a few slots. If you consider playtime equity, this means you're not going to be able to maintain a roster of 26 plus. People will leave because they're seeing less raid time, because we're swapping less people. Our roster now capped at 24. Having backups for each role is not tenable because of gears, blah blah blah. So that creates the net effect is that guilds have smaller roster than ever before, fewer backups, and are struggling to balance playtime equity. This means guilds operate with more risks than ever. If there are unexpected outs, players quitting, or trials that don't pan out, the guild is significantly more likely to die. This is then all impacted by a shifting balance within the game itself. Reworks tend to lead to overpowered specs. They're not tuned enough going into a new tier, which then mandates blah blah blah. This again not help because blah blah blah. This Yeah, I mean, I personally still don't understand the whole class buff thing. At least not properly. I don't understand why we have them. Like, I don't know what the purpose of them really is, the class buffs. I understand they want you to force they want us to bring certain classes to raid, like I get that. But for whom? Who do they want to force to bring these classes? Like, I just don't really understand, because a super casual guild, they're not gonna have all of the buffs, so they have a disadvantage because class buffs exist, right? And with so many class buffs, the like top end guilds all just kind of play the same comp, which is also like that. Is that a good thing? I don't think it is. And if they're trying to make the ritual first guilds bring more variety, then I also don't necessarily understand that either. Because so what if Echo brings 4 hunters to kill, or like 5 mages? Like, why does it matter? I'm not sure I understand. I think it's for the same reason we don't want them. This class is bad, but someone likes to play it so they don't feel forced to reroll to a meta class to have a chance of being picked. Like, I see that issue, but the thing is, for most class buffs, this is not even true. Like, let's say Mark of the Wild, for example. Let's say I really like playing Guardian Druid. Does Mark of the Wild really help me to be able to stick to Guardian Druid? No, it really does not, right? Because I'm not playing Druid, I'm playing Guardian Druid. Like, I feel like class buffs for hybrid classes makes so little sense. I understand something like Arcane Intellect. Because a mage is a pure damage dealer, and if you play a mage, you bring that buff, right? But I think class buffs for hybrid specs or hybrid classes is such a weird thing. Because people usually, I don't want to say usually, but a lot of people don't main a whole class as like the main thing. Like, not every monk main plays Brewmaster, Windwalker, and Mistweaver. Like, you either play Brewmaster and Windwalker, or you only play Windwalker, or only play Brewmaster. And then a class buff is not really gonna help you. Because if Brewmaster is bad, then Brewmaster is bad. And then they're just gonna bring a Windwalker to get the buff, right? Or a Mistweaver, if they're good. So I don't think, if that is what the class buffs are for, to like bring class, or like help people to not need to reroll, then I don't think it's succeeding on any hybrid specs. It might be succeeding on something like a mage, but not on any hybrid specs. So I don't know, I think it's just weird. At the end of the day, a lot of players love the concept of parsing. If their guild does not have all of the buffs and varieties, then they feel gimped and don't have a chance to parse because of the disparity that meta classes provide. I mean, parsing is... I do agree that people like to parse, but nowadays parsing is so, like, meaningless. With all of these buffs and all of these single buffs. Like, not only do we have class buffs, we also have PI and Aug Evoker, and, like... I feel like parsing lost so much value over time. And I think that's also... I feel like that is a little bit negative for the game. Because of what you said. Like, I think people like to parse. But if parsing is less and less meaningful, then the motivation to parse also goes down, doesn't it? At least I think so. I'm not sure if everyone feels this way. But I personally couldn't care less about parsing nowadays because it's so meaningless. With all of these like single like target buffs that you have, it just makes no sense. It's just stupid. I know that some people still like parsing and like getting buffed and all that stuff, but I don't know. If you're the person that gets buffed, you're happy. If you're anyone else, like, you know, you're not gonna have a chance. So yeah, this whole buffing thing, the class buffing, I think they should just remove them again. I don't know, just fuck these class buffs, they're just so dumb. And they kept adding more class buffs. And people asked for them too. People keep asking for more class buffs. Every year or every expansion, they're like, oh, Shaman needs a class buff, oh, Hunter needs a class buff, DK needs a class buff. And it's like, don't shut the fuck up. Like, I understand that you're basically trying to give everyone something meaningful, but why? We should go the opposite way. We should remove class buffs. We shouldn't be adding more. This is just dumb. User interface. Encounter design itself has been leveling up. The bomb mechanic made famous by Hellanders and later utilized the bracket is a great example of continuing innovation. Other examples where the addition of the energy bar to encounters player symbols, Odin runes, Stargar signs, and animated arrows for directional beams, and blah blah blah. Ping system is additionally a great in-game system. However, all of these except the encounter energy bar are improvements to the game world, not the user interface. But as we know, the core of any encounter is your interface. This year Blizzard has too long relied on the community. They started to remedy this in Dragonflight, but have a long way to go, especially for encounters. Default rate frames are still inadequate for many classes. They need more customizability and they need to be performant. So we aren't relying on add-ons that aren't. Party frames are in the same bucket. Friendly NPC nameplates are clunky and don't work well enough. Blizzard should continue developing more types of frames to reduce some of the needed for health. I disagree with this whole point. We still fundamentally rely on timer add-ons like Big Wigs DVM, and Blizzard could be adding more intuitive elements to the interface that help players keep track of timing in a fight or anticipate mechanic. Often this is clearly derived from an energy bar on a boss unit. Other times it's derived from analyzing log timings. It's time to level up the interface and do better for your players. As encounter complexity has increased, choreography assignments, the community has been forced to develop solutions to facilitate the ever-increasing complexity of strategy. This is a WeakAura problem. WeakAuras themselves are not the problem, to be clear. That add-on is adding much needed functionality that Blizzard for long has not bothered to implement into their base game over the last 20 years. Blizzard has been spoiled by the add-on community. It's time for Blizzard to pay that back to the community and improve the user interface in a more meaningful way, especially for encounters. Private OS were an attempt to curb mechanic trivialization by limiting what can automatically be solved with a WeakAura. However, a key consideration was overlooked in doing so. Quite often, a programmatic solution has been a requirement, because of how kind of been designed well into blah. Need to spread 625 yards around in 6 seconds on Neltharion. Good luck self-organizing without any tools. Need to assign 20 players around to rack 4 bombs based on a random color assignment in 6 seconds. Good luck self-organizing without any tools. Nothing was added to the user interface to help us, and we're expected to wing it for such punishing coordination checks. Focus the development effort on providing us tools to do what you expect us to do. You can't introduce private OS and make no improvements to the user interface. See, I disagree with this. I don't disagree with the problem. I think the problem that he's stating is true or is real. I disagree with his suggestion to solve the problem. Because I think the user interface that we got in Dragonflight is actually really good. And I think putting more time and effort into adding more options to the standard user interface is not necessarily the solution, because people that... So here's the thing. People that want a lot of settings for an add-on, they're never gonna be happy, in my opinion. Like, if you're a healer in a Mythic raiding guild, you're almost never gonna go with the standard raid frames, even if they add more options to it. And then the question is, like, how many options are you gonna add to each individual part to make people happy enough so they don't install an add-on? Is the question. What do you mean, how do you even know that? Because I play the game. I am playing the game, and I know that I would never use standard Blizzard nameplates unless I have the same amount of settings that Plater provides. And I just, like, do you really think it's worth it for Blizzard to create an add-on like Plater for nameplates, when people that want the Plater settings are people that would use Plater anyway? Like, my logic here is that people that want these kind of infinite settings, they will use add-ons no matter what you do. Unless you literally create Plater and weaker us, right? And people that don't need Plater or weaker us or something that is as advanced as that, they will just be overwhelmed by having so many settings. Some people don't think about the fact how overwhelming it can be to have a lot of settings. Like, sometimes people download an add-on because they see someone else using it, like Weakoras or Plater. They download the add-on and they open up the options and they're completely overwhelmed. There's like a million settings, it's hard to understand, and they close the settings again and they just run with the standard settings because it's too complicated. So sometimes having a lot of settings is not actually better, especially for people that are like more casual players or people that are not high-end players. So saying that they should be adding a lot more options, I don't think it's only a good thing. Like, you do have to consider that having an insane amount of customizable things is also adding problems. Yes, it's a bloat. Yeah. You can hide the settings in some sort of advanced mode. Yeah, you could technically have like a basic editing mode and then advanced editing mode. But again, like, let me explain why I think that the private aura thing here is not necessarily an interface issue. So I think the problem with the private auras that we have currently, I think that is something that needs to be solved by the encounter developers. Like, I think, because it is true that spreading 625-yard bombs in 6 seconds on Neltharion, or assigning 20 players on Ferak for bombs in 6 seconds, that's not something you can do without any kind of help, right? Like, you can't. It's impossible, right? I think it's stupid. But I don't think that the solution to this problem is to change the interface to make us be able to do it. I think the solution is to not make a mechanic like that. Like, why would you create mechanics that require you to have some sort of interface arrow that points you to a direction. Yeah, Neltharion bombs were horrible. So I think fix not creating mechanics like this in the first place is how you solve the issue, and not give us an interface pop-up that says go left, you know? Because replacing private auras with a in-game like pop-up or whatever, at that point, like, isn't that kind of dumb? Like, I don't know. You can't create mechanics like that that require the in-game interface to have you like show an arrow or like point to some place, like, because otherwise what else would the interface do to help you with this? Like, at that point, that's just dumb. Didn't say they release a bosses thinking of people developing weakness in order to kill them? No, of course. Of course, most of the bosses in World of Warcraft were designed with add-ons in mind. Of course they were. I think people aren't trying to solve problems because weakness exist, so they don't need to. That is for sure true as well, I think, D3, yes. I think that is 100% true. That is also a problem that cannot necessarily be solved, though. I think. Because I do think it's true that, especially if like the Raceable First Guilds were using a weaker for it, other people are just like thinking they also need, or they're thinking it's easier when it might not be. Because a Raceable First Guild, like a guild like Echo or Liquid, they're gonna prepare for the boss a lot. Obviously, right? They're doing so much theory crafting beforehand, and they're creating all of these weak auras that they learn how to use beforehand, right? Because weak auras by default, especially private auras, are not necessarily easy to understand immediately. Sometimes using a private aura can be hard, first of all, to set it up properly for it to work, but then also to like understand the information that it's giving you, right? And a guild like Echo and Liquid, they use the time before the raid comes out to learn how these add-ons work and these weak auras work, and then they will apply this knowledge once they're progressing, right? But for them, it might be the best solution to use these weak auras. But for a normal Mythic guild, it might not be true. For a normal Mythic guild, the time that it takes for people to get used to the weak aura, to learn how it works, it might be the same amount of time, or even more amount of time, than it would take you to learn the boss without the weak aura, right? And that is something that is hard to solve for Blizzard. Because at that point, it's the community's fault in a sense, right? And then there's not that much they can do other than not creating these kind of mechanics in the first place. When you get bombs on Nelth and each player got a unique icon or number above their head, we would have never needed the weak aura. That's wrong. You're wrong. Even if each player would have gotten an icon over the head, the Raceable First Guilds probably would have used the private auras instead. You know why? Because the private auras had a logic behind it. And if the numbers over your head would not have had a logic, then it would have been harder. Think about it. How does Nelth bombs work? And how did private auras work? You have the room here, whatever. And number 1 position is here. Number 2 is here, let's say, yeah? And with the private auras, me as a player, I almost all the time was either assigned to this or to this. So I had to remember where these spots are. I had to remember that 1 is here, 2 is here, 1 is here, 2 is here, 1 is here, 2 is here. I never had to remember spot number 5. Because me being 5 was almost impossible, right? So I only had to remember 1 and 2, or maybe 3, right? And that's it. Because the private auras had a logic that you could figure out yourself. If Blizzard would have given us random numbers over our head, or random markers, that would have meant that I have to remember every position in every spot, unless the icon had a logic. But that logic cannot be changed by us players. So we still would have used the private auras, because the logic that we as players followed was that a person that is not very mobile gets a spot that is closer, right? Position 1 and 2 were positions that usually had to walk to pretty far. So really mobile classes like mages, evokers or whatever got these positions, right? Now imagine you have random symbols over your head that could assign you to the number 1 spot, and you're a DK or a priest or whatever, and you have to walk from here to all the way over here because 1 is here. We would have not done that, or at least Echo and Liku would have not done that. Echo would have ignored the markers over the head and would have still used the private auras to make sure you have a logic on your position, right? Because it would have literally just been harder for them to go with random numbers. And no one was... Like, the thing with the marker... Like, I'm not saying that it wouldn't have worked for like a normal Mythic guild somehow, but you could have done that even without the private auras. But that's why I'm saying that the mechanic is the problem. The mechanic itself was the issue, in my opinion. Not the UI. Because yeah, the whole private aura thing was incredibly stupid. I agree, I 100% agree. Like that mechanic with the private auras, it was horrible. It sucked so much. I'm just saying that the solution to the problem, in my opinion, is the mechanic itself, rather than solving it through like an interface option or like a UI thing. There's like a separate discussion going on that I haven't paid attention to. Let me read what you guys are saying. What are you guys saying about FF14? What does any of this have to do with FF14? What's the discussion? Somebody give me a TLDR. Are we just talking about the whole addons thing? Oh, you're saying that FF14 has like clearer indicators and therefore they don't need weak auras. Okay, yeah. See, that is true. But it's only true because some abilities are solved by roles. And that same thing cannot be done in World of Warcraft because of, literally just because of the design of the game. Like, a lot of mechanics in FF14 are not solved through indicators, but rather through roles. Right? Like some mechanics, you know, this is gonna go on healers plus, like on one healer and then one this, on one tank and one this. Like a lot of these mechanics are kind of solved by the raid size being 8 people, and by having a certain amount of required roles. Like you need 2 tanks, 2 healers, and so many damage dealers, right? And it's like a perfect division with an 8-man raid. Right, you have 2 tanks, 2 healers, 4 DPS. And then a lot of the mechanics are either like they're all DPS, or they are all both tanks and both healers get the mechanic, or one healer, 1 tank gets the mechanic, you know. And at that point, it's not solved through indicators, it's solved through logic. And this same logic that FF14 uses cannot be used in World of Warcraft, because we don't have this same numerical logic with the raid size. We have 2 tanks. We have a random amount of healers. Not every boss has 4 healers or 5 healers or 3 healers. It's always kind of different. We don't have the same amount of melee every time. We don't have the same amount of ranged. So solving mechanics through this like numerical logic does not work in WoW. And that's why it's also harder to use like that same FF14 logic. The indicators in FF14 are also more clear. That is also true. Like the circles and the indicator, like they're more clear. And I think the reason why they're not as clear in World of Warcraft is to add difficulty. Because WoW needs to rely on randomness a little bit more compared to FF14. Because just because of the raid size. Like there's 20 people in the raid, and you cannot make an encounter, like an FF14 encounter for 20 people. Like you just can't do that. It's impossible. You need to rely on some RNG, you need to rely on like maybe visuals that aren't like perfectly clear, you need to rely on like coordination of the group. So it's FF14 is like a choreography that needs to be executed by people, while World of Warcraft is more of a, like the most difficult thing about WoW raids is like the coordination of the group, rather than dodge this circle or deal with this mechanic while standing perfectly in this formation, right? And yeah, so the reason why FF14 players can handle difficult mechanics without weak auras is because of that logic that I just mentioned earlier. Like, an ability like the Neltharion bombs can be solved in FF14 really easily because it would follow a logic. If the Neltharion bombs would have been a mechanic in FF14, then it probably would have worked like this. It's like, I don't know, either the 4 damage dealers get the bomb, or the 2 tanks and the 2 healers get the bomb, right? And then you already, like, you know beforehand where to go. Because of the raid size being much smaller. And because of there always being some sort of logic, because of the set amount of rolls. That's why weak auras are not... computational weak auras are not needed in FF14, because you have this logic which makes you preemptively know what you're gonna have to do, very likely, right? In WoW, it does not work that way. Because of the raid size, because of the illogical number, like because of the random number of rolls that you have. And as soon as you have a mechanic that does not follow a logic, it creates so many variables that it makes weak auras a lot more important or a lot more necessary, right? Because if I, as a damage dealer, can get position 1 or position 2 or position 3 or 4 or 5, and I have to remember all of these positions in each like slice, that's super difficult. And 20 people have to do that. That's insane, right? If it's FF14, then this is not going to be the case. Then I'm going to have an assigned spot. I'm going to be, if I get the bomb, I'm going to be in 1. Or maybe 2. If I get the bomb on this slice, I'm going to be either here or here, right? So in FF14, I'm going to need less positions to remember, and I can do that without the weak aura. And in WoW, it just doesn't work unless you have some sort of logic that you follow, which we are emulating with weak auras, or private auras in this case. Guys, do not discuss difficulty between FF14 and WoW. They're completely different games, okay? It's comparing apples to bananas. It makes no sense. We got stuck on this discussion, but let's continue talking about this. Well, so anyway, as I said, I personally think that a big issue is that they made certain weak auras private, or they banned certain weak auras without changing the way they design bosses. I think that's the biggest issue. So what I think happened is that part of the team that is creating World of Warcraft, they were like, we should ban computational weak auras. And then the developers did not like keep up, like the encounter designers. The encounter designers did not keep up with that change. I think now they should, like, hopefully they'll figure it out, but the encounter designers need to change the way they design bosses with this change in mind, with the private auras in mind. And they need to do it somewhat soon. And understand, creating encounters is not easy, obviously, right? Especially if you need to create encounters that need to be difficult for a guild like Echo or Liquid. It's super hard. Like, I can't even imagine how difficult it is to create a boss fight that is challenging for the Racewell Forest guilds, and then at the same time, it's not way too hard for, like, a normal guild, and still enjoyable for a normal guild, and, like, there's so many things they have to consider when they design an encounter. It's incredible. And then they also have to remember private auras and weak auras and all of this stuff, and I can I can see how hard it is, but still, we need it to happen. Alright, unknown to legendaries. The acquisition of legendaries has been subject to a lot of criticism. I think the 2 legendaries in Dragonflight really haven't felt legendary at all. Personally, I believe these items need to be more difficult to build, potentially taking weeks, but easy to begin building. I disagree. Really, what makes an item legendary is the activities that went into building it. Historically, items like Shadowmourne and Taragosa felt truly legendary. The biggest issue with acquisition currently is even starting a journey has a minuscule drop rate. It's kind of bad luck in MOBA. Historic quest is more accessible and people can make incredible progress. High difficulty race, dropping more materials for the legendary is nice instead to push blah blah blah. In terms of balance, I think it's ideal for them to be powerful. But I don't believe any spec should be tuned around the assumption that you will get the legendary. That way it's only a bonus and not a necessity to have it. Yeah, see, I disagree with this whole thing. So, the first thing... I personally think legendaries should be gone. That's my personal opinion. Because I think no matter what you do with legendaries, there will always be huge downsides. No matter what you do, it will always be fucked up in a way. So, number one, acquisition of legendaries, right? Because it is true that legendaries don't truly feel legendary. But why is that? Why are legendaries not feeling truly legendary? Because you need to make it somewhat fair to get it, right? Because if a legendary actually is legendary, like if you think about Thunder Fury, or like any kind of older legendaries, or like the Illidan Glaives, if you think about those legendaries, they truly felt legendary. But why? Because they had a really low chance to drop, and only a few people actually got it. That's why the rarity of the item is what made it feel legendary, right? Because the definition of legendary is the rarity of the item, technically. But if we have legendaries be so rare that only few people get it, then it would not work with the current balance of the game. Because you cannot have a truly legendary item that is rare to acquire and also have the power that it needs to actually be a legendary item. Because then you're gonna have a game that is super imbalanced. Then you're gonna have some people with an item that makes them do 10% more damage than the other people, and the others didn't get lucky and they don't have it, right? So I don't think you can make legendaries truly legendary through acquisition anymore. What he's suggesting is that it should be easy to initially get the item and then just take a long time to build the item, which is exactly what we had with the legendary ring in Walls of Janner, the legendary cloak in BFA. We had these before. Did they feel legendary? No. I didn't think those felt legendary. It's like everyone gets it, and then it takes a long time to build it. It's like, okay, what, you know, it's like, at that point, it's a guarantee that you will get it, which in my opinion already ruins the legendary effect of it. I think some people remember Shadowmourne as like a legendary item or like a legendary thing because it was so powerful. I don't think the acquisition of Shadowmourne or like what was it called, Taragosa, was actually legendary. Because you knew you're gonna get it. And if there's a certainty around something, it reduces the legendary effect of it. The more certain something is, the more you know I'm gonna get this item here, the less legendary it feels, right? Like, I think that's why RNG exists when it comes to loot acquisition, right? Because RNG is what makes it feel better. That's why legendaries in Legion felt good. A lot of people liked the way legendaries worked in Legion, where you randomly got to drop them. Because every time you got a legendary, it felt like it was not expected, basically. Like you were doing it in Plus Dungeon, you finish the dungeon and the legendary popped up and you're like, what the fuck? Like it was unexpected, which made it feel good. Now, of course, there was other issues with legendaries in Legion, with the actual items themselves, but the acquisition felt legendary in a sense because it was unexpected, right? The more expected legendary is, the less good you're gonna feel about it in a sense, right? An RNG drop felt legendary. Yeah. I mean, I don't know, like obviously this is all opinion based, right? Everyone gonna have different opinions, but I got Taragosa stuff in Firelands and I didn't feel it was legendary at all. Like I got this legendary while progressing and I didn't feel it was legendary. I felt bad that I wasn't the first person to get it. And then when I finally got it, I was like, well, finally have it. I was not like, oh my god, I got it now. To me, it just felt like, oh, this legendary is super strong and I really want to have it. But my guild chose someone else to have it first, which obviously like makes sense. But then I felt bad for not having it. And then at some point I got it and I was like, finally, you know? I didn't feel like, oh my god, this is legendary thing. I felt like, oh my god, I finally have it, you know? So I did not think it truly felt legendary to me. The only thing that I think truly felt legendary was something like Thunder Fury, Illidan Warglaves, and these kind of things. Like these like random kind of drops that actually were like legendary, like super rare drops. But they don't work anymore in retail WoW, right? So I think legendary acquisition can never be good, in my opinion. In my opinion, I don't think you can create a legendary that actually also feels like the acquisition of it is legendary. And then when it comes to the power increase, I also disagree with this opinion here. Because he's basically saying that the class should do normal damage without the legendary and then do 10% more with the legendary. Which would be possible. Like that would just mean that every class that has a legendary is broken. Like that would make, like let's say Moonkin does the most damage, and then, you know, yeah, like you have, I don't know, let's just say this is like a normal statistic of like damage, right? Like let's say this is what the damage curve looks like, yeah? And this is normal. And now let's say mages have a legendary, and if you get it, you do 10% more damage. Well, then you're gonna be like here, right? So you're just overpowered at that point. Does that make sense? Do we want classes to be overpowered just because they have a legendary? Like, is that fun? Because I don't think so. I mean, it might be fun for that class that has the legendary, but not for anyone else. Do we want that? I don't. I'd rather have the game be balanced. It would feel legendary, like I agree. It would feel legendary. But do we want the game to be imbalanced just for legendaries to exist? Like at that point, why have legendaries at all? I don't know, like I don't understand. Why do we want a spec to be broken? I don't get it. What's gonna happen is, oh, next patch mage is gonna get a legendary. Well, everyone's gonna reroll mage. Because we know for a fact that mage is gonna be broken. Why do we want everything to be perfectly balanced? Is that a serious question right now? Okay, what do you mean, why do we want everything to be balanced? Are you suggesting that the game should be less balanced? But don't you think that the old style of acquisition in Shadowmoor would prevent everyone from rerolling since only one gets made at a time? I mean, I personally just heavily disagree with a class being overpowered just for having a legendary. I don't care what the acquisition of the legendary is. And I don't care if people are rerolling to a class or not. I don't want a spec to be overpowered just because they get a legendary that patch. I personally just heavily disagree with any class being overpowered, especially by 10%. You know how much 10% is? That's insane. If a spec does 10% more damage than everyone else, that's incredibly broken, yeah? That is super broken. That's Dastro Warlock Season 3 levels. in M+, in Shadowlands. And I don't want that to happen. If you disagree, sure. But I personally don't want legendaries that make people 10% stronger than everyone else. Like, that's an insane opinion to have, in my opinion. Like, to me, that sounds horrible. It's so funny, though. Like, I like reading these posts because, like, I read this whole thing, and there's certainly some stuff that the main thing that I agreed with this post was the stating of the issues. Like, the issues that this person was pointing out, I agree with. Most of them. But the solutions that this person is offering, I disagree with most of them. Which is so interesting. Because it shows how hard it actually is to find solutions for these problems. Like, it's really not as simple as we think it is if people that literally play the game for the same reason don't come up with the same solutions. Because I play the same, like, I am basically, when it comes to the player base, there's always different kinds of players that play the game for different reasons, right? Like, there's going to be mount farmers, there's going to be people that love the lore, there's people that like leveling, questing, there's people that like arena, BGs, there's people that like to raid, there's people that like to play in plus, right? There's all kinds of different players. But I would argue that this person that is writing this post is very similar to me as a player. Because I am a high-end Mythic raider, high-end plus player, just like this person here, right? So to see that I, being a similar player than him, have differing opinions in what the game should look like, makes you think, okay, if we, the people that play the game for the same reasons, already have different opinions on how to solve some of the issues, then how different are the opinions going to be from people that play the game for other reasons? Like, what is an LFR raider going to think about this? They're probably also going to have completely different solutions to problems. Or a PvP player or whatever, right? So it really points out, or it really shows how hard it is to find solutions for any of these issues, right? You're never going to have it perfectly. Like, the game is just not going to be perfect for everyone. It's just so difficult to do. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of people that also fully agree with this person. Yeah, of course, the issue that there are so many people playing the game for different reasons also makes... That is the main reason why we have so many problems at all. This is something I talk about a lot when it comes to Mythic Plus. Like, the fact that people play the game, or even specific aspects of the game, for different reasons, creates unsolvable issues. Like, even M+. M+ is a specific aspect of the game, but people play M+ for different reasons. Not everyone plays M+ for the same reason. People play M+ for gear and for the vault, and other people play it for score. There's some people who only play it to get like the mount, KSM, achievements, and other people play it for score. And these two players, they couldn't be more different. A player that only wants to do maximum plus 20 for the vault is a completely different player than a person that wants to do M+ for the highest score. And these two players are going to have completely different interests, even though they play the same content, right? And that obviously creates issues that are, in my opinion, unsolvable or incredibly hard to solve. It's different for something like Arena. Because Arena, I feel like everyone that plays Arena for very similar reasons. Right? There's not going to be super different Arena players. They all kind of have the same goal when they play Arena, when they queue up for it. Or the same motivation. So, that issue that we have in the Plus does not exist in Arena, in my opinion. The one thing that the biggest issue is for an Arena player is items. Because items is something that everyone needs in the game. Every player, no matter what kind of player you are, no matter if you play Arena, or if you farm transmogs, or if you're an M+ player or a Raider, all of these people, the one thing that we all have in common is that we want our character to be strong through items, right? And which means that unfortunately, item acquisition is something that is very difficult to solve because so many people playing the game for different reasons all want basically the same items. And solving that issue is a bit hard.